let's speak to Jonathan Davis, who's an economist, wealth advisor, giving perhaps his views and thoughts on that budget. Jonathan, very good morning to you.
And to you, James.
So, tell me first of all, did Philip Hammond, in your opinion, do a good job?
He's a politician. His job was to save his job and that of his boss, Theresa May. He achieved that. As far as I'm concerned, the Tory backbenchers no longer want them out of their jobs. So yes, he did a good job. That's probably not what you're asking, but that's my answer.
Okay, so in terms of saving his job, if you like, do you think then, when it comes to the government picking on people, if you like, they've got to pick on people in order to pay a bit more or to equal out the system, particularly if they don't have a lot of room to manoeuvre. Do you think, as a set of targets, has Philip Hammond gone after the individual rather than the corporation?
Yes, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But let's be clear, every single budget since time immemorial is not about helping the people. It never has been. It's always it's a party political broadcast.
Well, of course it is.
Okay, well, I'm glad we're agreed on that. Yes, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the international professional analysts, have shown that over the next 5 years, in the forecast period of the budget, we will have higher overall taxes than at any time since the Second World War. This from a so-called low-tax government. Absolute utter nonsense. They are totally unfair taxes for society, to answer your big question at the moment, because the people who should be paying more tax are not. You've rightly pointed out, for example, the multinationals. It's an absolute outrage that big international companies make billions of profits from business in the UK and then pretend, because the international laws say it, that actually it went through Ireland, therefore they pay so little tax. That is an outrage.
You say it's an outrage. Hang on, let's just deal with that point.
Okay.
You say it's an outrage, and I understand why people might be upset about it. But we as a country, along with every other country, has not learnt or worked out how to deal with globalisation. That if you have a corporation and you have different tax rates around the world, inevitably companies are going to set up, whether it's measures or whether it's means or whether it's infrastructure, to allow them to reduce or minimise their tax bill, particularly when there are double tax situations. So, for example, any US company, they have to pay tax not only on their US earnings but worldwide earnings unless they're sheltered or protected. So they don't want to pay tax twice. That's fair enough, isn't it, if they want to avoid or reduce their tax bill?
They don't pay tax twice. Apple, which of course is just about the most successful company on the planet, practically pays no tax. Amazon too.
But that's not true. They pay a lot of tax. They just happen not to. Yes, they just happen not to necessarily pay as much as you would like. But part of the reason for that is because
I'll get the data and I'll tweet it to Talk Radio. And
I think you should.
They pay very little tax.
No, they pay a lot of tax. But the point is that because they're a US company, they have huge amounts of money which is overseas. Because as soon as they repatriate it, they have to pay tax in the US, and that's because we don't have international tax laws which are set up for globalized institutions.
Okay, you changed the subject. What I said was there are companies making fortunes, I said billions, in the UK from UK trading, but somehow it goes through Ireland, for example, therefore they don't pay taxes on the UK.
We're part
business.
of the EU, that's why. But that's why, because we're part of the EU. And we don't have harmonised tax across the EU. If we did, they wouldn't do it.
James, to quote you just 3 seconds ago, we don't have harmonised taxes, which means the UK could have its own taxes on international companies.
We could, but part of the reason that we don't is that successive governments of all flavours have wanted to attract international organisations to have their headquarters and to have various different operations here. And it's not just corporation tax that you should be looking at, because inevitably, if you've got a company who's based in the UK, they pay a lot of people their wages. Those wages are then taxed. In addition to that, that company will be paying the national insurance. In addition to that, they'll be paying business rates. In addition to that, they'll be paying VAT. And in addition to that, if they're selling their products here in the UK, then there's a whole onward chain of creative business. So to focus just on corporation tax is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it?
You're seriously suggesting that Google wouldn't do business in the UK if corporation taxes for multinationals was raised?
They wouldn't do the same business in the UK, no. And I know that. They absolutely wouldn't.
Yeah, you know something and I know something different. In a similar vein, this idea that...
well, I know it because I've spoken to them. What do you know?
All the banks and the bankers in the City of London, apparently they're all going to go to the city of Frankfurt when we Brexit, where there's 800,000 people. There's no way on earth they're going to do that. Whatever our taxes are going to be, the City of London is going to stay in Britain and pay the taxes. My point is, if they're doing business in the UK, they're making profits, they'll pay the tax.
Well, they will to an extent, but if you have a look at what international banks and institutions are doing, you could argue that the Chancellor is beginning to make it very difficult for international companies and business to want to stay here and to invest here, not because of Brexit or anything else, but because he's changing the rules. So, for example, a consultation which has been put into the budget, which will see overseas investors start to have to pay capital gains tax on any real estate investments that they make in the UK, is arguably a shot in the foot.
Well, if international folk who have, it's interesting they're putting that capital gains tax on property now in 2017, after 25 years of tax-free massive gains on property, it might have been useful if they'd done it some years before.
But then it wouldn't have inspired the huge amount of international investment that we've had.
Really?
Yes, really.
Yeah, you think people wouldn't come to the United Kingdom? One of the...
I absolutely know they wouldn't, because unbeknownst to you, Jonathan,
okay.
one of the things that I've been spending a lot of my time...
You're stating facts as if you're the only person in the world who knows some things.
Well, I've got direct experience of it. Have you?
I also look at what companies are doing.
You look at what companies are doing, yes, but I've done the things that the company...
I'm an analyst, James.
Yeah, clearly. Maybe you need to analyse some more.
Well, that's your opinion.
But I'm trying to understand why it is that you think that things will... I don't disagree that we've got to find a way, and maybe as we have this discussion, it's finding a way that there's some common ground perhaps, but this view that everybody will just continue doing what they're doing if you change the rules, they won't. And that's why the rules are there, because governments of successive natures have tried to encourage international business and investors to do things that they want them to do. Yes.
The tax system is as it is because it benefits the elite and the ultra-rich. Income tax was launched in 17... Let me make my argument, please.
Please, go for it.
In 1799, income tax was launched, and the British public, or the voters at that time, were told it's a temporary tax. Well, 218 years isn't very temporary. The rich have got even wealthier simply for the last 25, 30 years. For example, by owning a home in London, tax-free gains. You might say, well, everyone's a tax-free gains.
But everybody's main home is a tax-free gain.
Yeah. Can I just say, someone outside who had a £50,000 flat and it's now 250,000 is not the same as a £1 million house, and it's now 10 million is what has happened in London. Tax-free gains. So perhaps what we can do is we're looking for a solution, throw out every single tax that there is, and instead tax land and property. It's called land value tax. Winston Churchill tried to get it through, but of course the elite and the cronies didn't like it.
Well, of course they don't like it, because if you're looking to develop an economy, and I understand why land and property is so attractive for tax, but have a look at the unintended consequences, say, for example, of putting stamp duty at the top end of the market, that you might say, well, they're wealthy, they can afford it. The point is that as soon as you do that, you put inbuilt inflation into the market. So if you're very wealthy and you've put, say, 100 units into a property and you pay 10% stamp duty, you're not going to sell for less than 110 units, are you?
Yeah. Sure. I said get rid of all taxes, tax land and property as it is, and of course what that will do is it will bring down the price of property without a shadow of a doubt, because, for example, rich folk who have massive big houses, they'll not want to pay taxes every year, so they'll sell. Aunt Annie, who's living in a 5-bedroom house for the last 20 years on her own, she will want to trade down and so on. This will put pressure on prices. Property prices will come down. Do you know what that will do? We're talking about fairness in society. That will make it easier and more fair for people to buy property. One of the
so you don't think, but hang on, but think of all the people who own property. So say, for example, somebody is not...
people who don't own property?
Well, you can't have a system that just takes from one and gives to the other. That's just Robin Hood nonsense.
But for the last 30 years, only those in property have been taking from those who don't own property. So I'm talking about redressing the balance and bringing about fairness. It seems to me you don't actually want fairness.
No, not really. Not in the way that you ascribe, because it's not particularly fair. How is it fair? How is it fair to take away from those who have to give to those who have not, other than through the tax system? Where, for example, some people's tax rate is marginally 65%. Is that fair?
The rich, James, don't actually care about the taxes on income.
Yes, they do.
No, they don't.
No, they really do.
What they care about is the tax that they don't pay, and that's on their wealth and their property, their international wealth and their property. That's the thing that they care about.
You just want stuff that...
We don't tax internationals and property.
But what gives you the right to take away from either them or those who are wealthier or otherwise? What gives you the right to take away from them?
Because it's very interesting. You've put out the big question, how can we make taxes fairer? And I've given you a solution, and you're questioning my integrity.
Yes. Because I don't agree with the concept or the idea that you've suggested of making it fair. I totally understand. But I wouldn't say that your answer creates the fairness that I would like to see in society.
Well, that's for your listeners to decide. I think I made a very strong case for creating more fairness in society.
You've made a very strong case from taking away...
If property prices come down, I can assure you that will be fairer in society.
And it doesn't help the banks or the institutions who are invested. It doesn't help individuals who already own their own homes.
Yeah, we need to help the banks. They've just been given $25,000 billion.
Yeah, we do need to help the banks because guess what, Jonathan? The banks are looking after the money that is going to deal with...
No, they're not. They're screwing us to the floor.
Oh, dear.
They have been for
Dear.
decades.
So this is another area over which you have little or no understanding, isn't it?
When they went belly up, we handed them tens of trillions of dollars.
And why did we do that?
Not them looking after us.
And why did we do that, Jonathan?
Because the elite scored the biggest trick on the people since the mafia, and they said, if you don't bail us out, even though we've been reckless, it's going to destroy the world.
But you have to look. You have to look at some of the arguments within this. That,
yeah, I have.
That you may have done, but the point is that if you've got politicians both here and in the US and various other, they wanted to have people to own their own homes. So what they created was this bubble of finance, and if you create that politically, you're going to end up in trouble. And they didn't regulate properly. So to say that it's just the banks and the bankers, they are partly responsible for this, but you've got to look at governments, and also you've got to look at individuals who foolishly decided to take out loans that they could never afford to repay. This is everybody's responsibility.
As it happens, for once I'm starting to agree with you. The regulation that should have been in place should not have been some massive bureaucratic empire. It should have been market forces. In other words, if you, the bank, go bust, tough, you go bust, you, the bankers themselves, you lose your bonuses, you lose your jobs, and you lose your wealth. That is free market capitalism. Instead, we borrowed from 2 or 3 generations and handed it to already incredibly wealthy people.
We can thank Alistair Darling for that. Jonathan, shall we agree that we end this conversation on an area of agreement?
Sure, by all means.
There we go. We've run out of time. Jonathan Davies, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.